Netflix documentary, Making of a Murderer. So today, during my presentation, I'm going to be presenting to you the factual and unbiased evidence presented in this case. So ultimately, you'll be able to decide on your own verdict of their guilt or innocence. If you haven't seen this Netflix documentary, get ready for a roller coaster of deceit, corruption, and injustice. So not only have I pulled facts from the Netflix documentary, but I've also pulled a lot of information from cited sources online to confirm the viability of the evidence that I'm presenting to you today. As easy as it is to go along with facts that are fed to us through a show, it's really important that we conduct thorough research on something as important as this. So first, we're going to start with Steven Avery's cases from beginning to end, and then we're going to get into the juicy details of the suspected planted evidence, as well as prosecutorial misconduct that could possibly free the involved parties of this infamous case. Okay, so the best way to start a story is to start from the beginning. So we're going to start with a case that cost Steven Avery 18 years of his life. Steven and his family are from Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, where they own Avery Auto Salvage. They were an outlier of this close-knit community. They kept to themselves. They lived in unconventional ways that a lot of people thought was interesting, so they were disliked. Right after offending the wife of a local deputy of the Manitowoc County Police Department, Steven was imprisoned for first attempted murder as well as the sexual assault of Penny Bernstein in that picture right there. Despite having 22 eyewitnesses to confirm his alibi, it seemed that Sheriff Kosterick had a score to settle with the Averys. Never in MCPD history has a sheriff ever been so personally involved and enamored with a case than this one with Steven Avery. Local deputies also suggested a sexual predator in the Green Bay area, but it seemed that the sheriff and DA had their sights set on Avery. It wasn't until 18 years later and DNA evidence that exonerated Steven Avery and convicted Gregory, right there, who went on to commit 2 more sex-related crimes while Avery was imprisoned. The sheriff and DA's refusal to reconsider and pursue other suspects cost Avery his family, his reputation, and 18 years of his life. This ultimately led to an $18 million restitution lawsuit against the MCPD. So less than 2 years after his freedom and just days after depositions to help his lawsuit, Steven Avery was yet again behind bars for the death of Teresa Halbach. Before we go into what makes this case so special, I'm just going to give you the story that the MCPD wants the public to believe. Teresa Halbach was a 25-year-old freelance photographer who went to the Avery residence to photograph several vehicles that were for sale. She was last seen alive on their property on October 31st, 2005. Over the next course of a few hours, Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey would go on to brutally rape and murder Teresa Halbach and burn her body in a burn pit. Yikes. Okay. Her RAV4 was also found on their property that contained Steven Avery and Halbach's blood, and her keys were found in the trailer. So here you go. If you're thinking this is a pretty open and solved case, throw him in jail, whatever. It's a little bit too easy though. If you're thinking this is too coincidental, then you're agreeing with Kathleen Zellner, a famous defense attorney and huge advocate for wrongful convictions in the Chicago area. According to Zellner, new evidence has to be presented and violations of constitutional rights had to be made, including evidence being withheld and ineffective assistance of counsel, meaning that Avery's defense attorneys did not do their job of keeping him out of prison. This would eventually lead to an evidentiary hearing, otherwise known as the second trial. So one of the most damning pieces of evidence against Avery was all the blood found in Teresa's car. The MCPD states that they believe this blood source was from a small cut on Steven's finger, which led to blood above the ignition, as well as flakes on the carpet and a drip in the back seat. Zellner conducted an experiment where she got the same make and model of Teresa's car, and she got a man with similarly sized hands as Stephen and put blood on his finger, and she found through her testing that it was physically impossible to make that smudge above the ignition from a simple cut on the finger. And fresh blood is proven to be absorbed by carpet, so why was there dry blood flakes found on the carpet beneath the driver's side and the center console? Interesting question. A blood spatter analyst was called a vital component in proving Avery's innocence, and he said that there was no way that the blood could have happened naturally in the way that the MCPD stated to happen. So there's no other alternative than the evidence being planted, which Avery's defense attorneys never called a blood spatter analyst, so that's yet again another constitutional violation that they didn't do everything that they could to keep him out of jail. Okay. So how would blood get in this vehicle from Stephen Avery? Good question. Stephen Avery his cut had reopened and bled all over his sink, and he swears that the blood had magically disappeared the next day. Through Zellner's testing, it was confirmed that if dry blood was to be scraped from the sink and sprinkled over the carpet, it would have the same flakes that were found in the original RAV4, which coincides with the defense that Avery was framed for this crime. According to Zellner, the killer took the blood out of the sink, which testing confirmed. Okay, so if you're thinking that planting evidence is pretty far-fetched, the evidence is damning. Like, come on. Okay, but what about Brendan Dassey? He is a 16-year-old who was called in for questioning regarding the whereabouts of Teresa Halbach. Detectives persuaded Dassey that they already knew everything that happened that night. They just needed him to confirm the facts. According to Laura Nyrider, Brendan Dassey's defense attorney, this is an interrogation tactic used by detectives to coerce their suspects into providing details. Not only was Brendan a minor with a mental incapacity, and his mother was not consented before the interrogation, nor was his attorney, but he was interrogated 4 times within a matter of 48 hours. So this is the interrogation. If you review this exchange between detective and Brendan Dassey, this is just a key detail of how this was a coerced confession. Dassey wasn't giving the evidence that they needed to convict him, so they fed him the evidence instead. I know this is long.
Yeah, you have to wrap up.
Should I just? So that's it.
Do the conclusion.
Okay, so in conclusion, all of the evidence that I presented to you has been passed to the Supreme Court, who will ultimately decide if an evidentiary hearing is needed for this case. The one thing that I want everybody to remember from this speech is the true victim of this crime, which is Teresa Halbach and her family. Jurors are instructed to not convict if they have a shadow of a doubt of a defendant's guilt or innocence. If you have any ounce of doubt of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey's guilt, then it's important that we investigate and pursue other suspects and continue to find the real killer. So what is your verdict? Those are your answers.